Thank you, Guillermo, and thank you to the American Society and the Council for having all of us this morning, and to you for joining us. Ladies, it's such a treat to have this space with you this morning to talk about the power of example and the impact of women's representation across industries. And I want to start with representation. What has it meant for you throughout your careers? And I'll start with you, Ambassador Lele.
Thank you, Julianne. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I feel very energized when I'm in a group like this, but full of women and few men, nothing against men. But Julianne, I think representation meant absolutely everything for me in my career. Maybe not for the reasons you're thinking of, but I've been around the block for a long time, and I started my career in the early 80s. And I remember the day that I read on the paper that the results of the exams to enter the diplomatic career were out. It was the beginning of the 80s, so you had to go personally, see if your name was on the list. So I took my car, went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Brazil to check if my name was on the list. And my heart was pounding, I was very nervous. And when I got there, yes, my name is here on the list. And I was very happy. I turned around to go to the elevator, go home, tell my family. And I saw this woman coming in my direction. She was the wife of a very powerful ambassador at that time, and we socialized together, we played tennis together. So I opened my eyes, my arms very wide, and I smiled very largely from one ear to the other. And I said to her, I screamed in the corridor, I made it! And she just walked past me. She never stopped. And she said, as she was walking past me, she said, this career is not for women. And my arms fell, my smile withered, and I thought, oh God, if this career is not for women, this has got to change. But I didn't become an activist immediately. No. I just realized it was like seeing a movie and looking at my life, the projection of my life, and I thought, oh my God, to be included, I want to be included, I want to be one of them, I want to belong to this group, so I will have to excel. So I panicked. Am I good enough? I have to do my best every day. Is my best good enough? And that was my north throughout my whole career. I was, putting the best that I could so that I could be included. And if I were included, others would be included too. So 20 years down the road, I found myself sitting in the chair of that woman's husband's, that woman's husband's chair. Thank you. It was not planned. It was not planned. It was not a vengeance. She disappeared from my head and my thoughts. The only thing that stuck to me was the fact that I had to do my best every day. And I did it, and it paid off. And I was participating. I was, as chief of cabinet, chef de cabinet, or chief of staff of the minister, I was the first woman to be nominated to that position. So I was sitting at the table, I was giving my opinion, and I was being listened to. And I made sure that in that position to pull other women up the ladder. But this is another story. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador Lele. How about you, Michelle? Representation.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So similar to the ambassador, representation means everything. And I think for me, growing up in corporate America, I've spent over 34 years in a number of different industries. I've lived outside of the United States for 2/3 of my career. I've lived in Switzerland for 10 years, Hong Kong for 5 years, Istanbul, Turkey for 3 years. I didn't necessarily see a lot of individuals who looked like me. And so, and I didn't see many individuals who looked like me in any capacity, even at the junior level all the way through to the boardroom. And so representation for me, it just means if I can see her, I can be her. And so seeing that role model allowed me to understand what was possible for me. And so I've just, over the years, have done everything that I possibly can to ensure that any individual, especially young women, that it is my indelible responsibility to ensure that she sees me, she hears me, she feels valued, and that I pull her along the journey. So I think this notion of representation, it means validation that we are here, that we are equally as talented. We just might need some additional support in order to get to our next, whatever that next is, that it illustrates what's possible, that it can be possible. You can sit in these boardrooms and assume and occupy these large-scale roles and manage billions of dollars in terms of revenue, that you can also break down stereotypes about who we are. And especially being a woman of color, there is this stereotype about us in terms of how we show up, how we engage, how we lead, and that will ultimately determine how we succeed. So representation means everything, and so I try to be as visible as I can. I try to, I don't roll up the drawbridge once I've crossed over to the other side in terms of leadership, and I would encourage all of us to do the same, but it just means everything, and I think that we need to continue to ask for what we want, and I think one of the initial speakers said that, asking for what you want, and I think representation, we need to continue to ask for that and hire for that and have some goals around it and hold ourselves accountable to it.
Thank you, Michelle. It's inspiring. To me, that's what representation is. It makes me feel like I can continue to grow, that I can make it, and love listening to you. Janine, do you want to share a little bit about your experience and what it's been for you?
Yes, thank you. Very much like Michelle, representation is, to me, a way of visualizing, right? Once you see someone in a position that perhaps you just didn't imagine was a possibility for you, once you see someone in that position, it really helps reframe how you see your own career and what are the possibilities. In terms of setting limitations for yourself, I certainly have set many limitations for myself that I later realized were just not real limitations. It's all in my head. Once I see someone who might look like me or share my values or have a similar background to me, I am able to then aspire to that. When I was a younger lawyer, I really didn't have that much, frankly. I always looked around the room and everyone sort of was the typical man. And so having the possibility even of being myself in the discussion was quite a challenge. If you're not surrounded, or at least have the one person that you can look up to and have a role model and say, she was able to do it, or that person was able to do it, maybe I have permission to ask for those things, right? So representation to me is really about visualizing yourself in the position, as well as being able to feel like you're invited, like you have something to say here, because someone else has already done it. But generally.
Thank you, Janine. And I'll add two other comments to representation as I see this, room full of women. To me, representation is also about your peers, about, being able to commiserate, to ask for advice, to, just feeling that sense of belonging in the room, which I usually, when I think of representation and I automatically associate it with example and looking up. But as I was thinking about this panel, I'm like, it's lonely. And it's just nice to have other, women, other underrepresented groups in the workplace. And that belongs to all of us. Like, that is the power of the network, of building those relationships and being effective, because it takes all of us. Ambassador Lele, I want to go, you're our only government representative on this panel, and I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about what policies can incentivize greater women's leadership in the diplomatic world or in government service.
I like that question. I can bring in a governmental perspective, but I want to weigh in a woman's perspective too on this one. I think we all agree, or we could agree in this room, that governments set the example, or at least should set the example. If a government has a very diverse or inclusive policy, so others will follow suit. Corporate world, the universities, parliament, everybody will try to emulate the government's thresholds and examples. So in the case of Brazil, we have quotas. Quotas for women, quotas for people of color, quotas for people with disability, and we can argue the pros and cons of quotas. I am in favor of quotas because I think it takes people out of their comfort zone. People get lazy. They like the status quo. So quota will give that push. So it's good to have quotas. But the thing that I ask myself very much is that enough? Is quota enough? We have quotas for so many things in Brazil. But it doesn't seem that in the case of women, it's not working. And then I come to my second point. When we look around, maybe even in this room, if we look around, women are everywhere. They are speaking their hearts. They are flying supersonic planes, not here in this room, but they are CEOs, they are prime ministers, they are whatever they want to be. They are even at home because it's their choice to be home. But when we look at these statistics and we look for the women, I don't think we are there yet. I don't think we have what to celebrate yet. When I look at these statistics and I see that women are, in most parts of the world, the main bread provider of their homes, but when they are home, they are victims of domestic violence. This is bad. Women, they are, at least in my country, they are occupying more than 50% of the university benches, but not the C-suite positions. And I saw in the papers that I read for this conference that I think around the world we are less than 25%. And then you look at political representation. Also in my country, and I think around the world, women are more than half of the electoral college, but we are voting in men because our representation in Congress is minimal. In my country, we have quota for women candidates. Then we have quota for the resources to finance the campaign of women. But our representation in Congress is still under 20%. So this is very, very low. But then my message, and I think the main question here is that, and I think Sarah addressed that, you have to raise your hand, you have to go get it. Nobody's questioning, at least publicly, that we have the right for certain positions. Today, no. When I started my career, yes. Not today. So today we have to trust ourselves. We have to trust other women and vote in them and allow them to progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Michelle, I want to ask you about programmatic incentives and initiatives in corporates that can incentivize greater leadership from women. But actually, before we get there, I want to take advantage that you're here, and if you can give us a little bit of context and background on just the evolution of DEI in the workplace before we get to specific programmatic incentives or initiatives for greater leadership in women.
Yeah, and I've been leading DEI for 30 years, so I've seen a true evolution over the course of time. This conversation, the discourse around DEI has really evolved over the years. It's no longer this conversation about representation. It encompasses so much more than that. That's only about a third of what the conversation really is. It's about representation. It's about how are we serving our customers and clients and all of those types of things, given the fact that our customers have a different need, a different set of wants, and how are we accommodating all of those things? And then there's the foundation and charitable giving piece. So I think this notion of DE&I has evolved in a good way. because 30 years ago, it was more of a headcount exercise. At least that's what it was when I started in it. It was how many women, how many people of color, and all of those kinds of things. So I think it's morphed into something that I think is a lot more comprehensive and fulsome. And so to answer the second part of your question, and I can talk about the organization that I represent. So I work for an asset manager, BlackRock. We are the largest asset manager in the world, 20,000 employees in over 30 countries. And we have goals and targets similar to government, where we're holding ourselves to a high bar. We're holding ourselves to a standard of representation of women. We want to double the number of women across the board overall, 50-50 gender split, across all businesses, across all sectors. But we're also, we want to double the number of women in leadership. And so we're holding ourselves accountable to that. And every leader, every business function within our organization has a target. And that target is annualized, and you're being held accountable to that through the compensation and the performance management process. So if you're not adhering to the things that we're putting in place, if you're not principled around DE&I, there is a consequence to it. So we're not playing games here. We really are very steadfast and committed and intentional about what we're doing. And one mechanism to do that is through accountability, and that is through measurements, scorecarding, and all of those kinds of things. Now, I want to also point out that representation is one aspect of this conversation. I think we can get women in the door. What you do with them while they're in the door is really at the heart of the conversation. Do they feel valued? Is there a clear career path? Do they see role models and other individuals like themselves so they can see the art of the possible? I think that is what most organizations, either in public sector or private sector, that they wrestle with. And so, in any case, I think that's also part of the conversation is representation, but also retention, advancement, and some other things that we want to see happen long term.
Janine, would you care to comment on some examples in the legal profession or that you've seen at White & Case to incentivize women to take on these leadership positions?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to give a few examples, our clients are asking for this. So if you're in the service industry, there's kind of the piece of we all need to work on this because it's the right thing to do. There's also the piece of it, in the United States at least, we have around 55% of law school students who graduate are women. So we have this talent pool. We are, hiring women in our lower ranks, and then we need to, invest in them and get them promoted as it's almost like an existential matter in terms of a long-term business. But in terms then of folks who kind of have a different view of the world and maybe sort of doing the right thing is kind of not that important. When you have a client such as BlackRock say, what are you doing? I want to see what is it that you're doing within your organization to improve your numbers. I think there's a lot of emphasis on, show me the data. And it's creating a real impact, at least from the service industry perspective. White & Case, for example, has gotten Mansfield Rule certification, which requires that a certain number of women have been promoted and are part of the global partnership. At this point, we're 22% of women partners, and for a law firm, these are the owners of the business. So it's actually, very important. And then that sets down sort of the message for the rest of the individual teams as well. There are other things that are incredibly important and which have actually helped a lot in my personal career. Internal networks. A lot of this is sort of formalized where the firm says, okay, we're going to kind of pair you up. We're going to have mentorship programs and programming to kind of help develop skill sets, not just on the actual work that you do, but how about, let's have a chat about how is it that you can do networking outside of the firm? How is it that you can, establish a presence when you're engaging in public speaking, for example? And all of those things kind of paired together, I think, are incredibly important for the questions of, what is it that we can do in terms of retention of women, over a long term.
Thank you, Janine. I want to stay with you and Michelle to talk a little bit about inclusive culture. I'm a big fan of the Maslow pyramid. Basically, it's the pyramid of needs where to practice at the top of your license, to be in the zone, to, you know, when you're in that groove where you feel like you're really effective, that you're outperforming, you know, assuming your basic needs are met, what they really highlight are two things. Is one, the sense of belonging to the place where you're working, and the second one is that your opinion is valued, that you have, you know, that you have a seat at the table, that you have something to add. And you often see underperformers in one company that go on to do extremely well at a different company. And a lot of that has to do with, you know, a different company being able to, you know, leverage their abilities to really help them be able to practice at the top of their license. Have you seen in your experience a link between inclusive culture and employee motivation, productivity, retention? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think they're all intertwined. And I think that in order for women, people of color, whatever the dimension of diversity you represent, in order to be successful, we as organizations cannot leave you to your own devices to figure out how you're going to be successful. We have to put in support systems, mechanisms for you to be successful. And this is where sponsors and mentorship programs come into play, leadership development opportunities come into play. And so I think it's more about understanding that we are all not a monolith, that there are some things that we need to provide in order for individuals to be successful. Flexible working arrangements, especially coming out of the pandemic. This notion of hybrid working is something that is discussed regularly in our organization through our women's network. They want flexible working, so we have a hybrid model of 3 in, 2 out. You come into the office 3 days a week, you work remotely 2 days a week. We don't care how you do it, as long as you do it. So I think it's those types of support systems that's really going to support women to become more productive, more innovative, more collaborative, now that we're starting to come back in office. So I think it's an aggregation of all of those things that are going to ensure that women are successful.
I mean, who likes to belong to a club that doesn't want you as a member of the club? I certainly don't. I mean, I think I'm an example. You know, I don't think that I would have achieved what I have achieved, and frankly, like, being a lawyer is already pretty hard. And kind of our clients, some of them are lovely and some of them are not. I love them all. But you just need to feel that support, right? You really need to get the training. You need to feel like you're valued, because, you know, I'm sure this room is full of very talented people who are very smart and very accomplished. If you are not feeling valued within your organization, what is it that you're going to do? You're going to exit, and you're going to take those skills and go to a competitor. So even just from a business sense, it doesn't make sense to not work towards building that inclusive environment that is supportive. Because, I mean, again, from the perspective of the service industry, we hire amazing students. We spend a lot of time and effort and resources in training them, and then a couple of years later they leave. That is not good business, right? That is not good service for our clients. The worst, I think or rather the best that we can hope for is that even if someone wants to leave the organization because of family reasons, you know, life happens, they will walk away from White & Case feeling like, you know, that was a great place to work. I learned a lot. I was supported. And if I move on to a different place, maybe I come back as a client. And I'm sure that, you know, the law firm experience is not unique, right? So this idea of, we all need to work towards an inclusive environment where we feel valued, where there are opportunities for promotion, and all of those things, to me, again, it's the right thing to do, but also makes just a lot of business sense.
If I can just pile on to that comment for a second. I always say that, especially in corporate, there are some individuals who have an easy go of it and who can take the proverbial elevator up to the C-suite, right? And then others have a different path. They have to take the stairs with a backpack and no air conditioning, and then when they get to the top of the stairs, the door is locked. So the question becomes, who's going to open that door, right? Who's going to open the door for us? And I think this is where sponsors, mentors, this is where male allies come into play. And so when we talk about support systems, that's what I mean. It's who's going to have our back. Now that you're there, now that you're occupying the seat, you're going to need support. So it's women supporting women, it's male allyship, it's mentor, sponsor, all of it. So that's what I mean by support systems.
Thank you, Michelle, because you brought me to my next question. To me, the power of example is not only about female examples, it's also about the examples that men can set for the women, for their male colleagues as well. And I want to talk about this with you, Ambassador. From your perspective, what roles can men play in supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts?
First, I want to comment on what they
Please,
just said, because I want to move to the corporate world. You're very nice people. I loved it. I loved it. Well, about men, I think my first comment is be at ease. Men are not our enemies, the first thing. Yes, they are our allies. And I think it's simple. It's as simple as that. It starts at home. If we pass on to our boys the right values, they will become, as they grow up, our advocates, our supporters, etc. But they will become that. And the present world is another world. And I think this world is a world where man is overrepresented in many circles, in many decision-making circles. And we don't expect from these men only advocacy and support. We expect them to do things, to remove the obstacles, to allow us to advance our own careers, your careers, and give a chance to women. So we want proactive men, we want role models. And sometimes these role models, they take, it's all about big decisions or small day-to-day decisions. I remember a few years ago that my husband was Director General of the WTO. He was invited to a traditional luncheon in Geneva. And when he received the invitation, it was a male-only luncheon. So he didn't hesitate. He got the phone, he called the organizers, and he said, well, I'm having a hard time accepting this invitation because of this and that. And they revealed the rule, and from then on, this is a luncheon for men and women. It's a small decision, but it makes a difference. And well, for Roberto, it was easy because he's the father of 2 girls and the granddad of 6 granddaughters. So he has to be a role model. Yes. And I like when he says that men have to be role model for women and for the family, because if you break barriers, if you're a good role model, this transcends generations, and I believe that. Thank you. I think stop here.
Yeah, I would not occupy the seat that I have at BlackRock or any other multinational that I've worked for over the years had it not been for male allyship, had it not been for the mentors and sponsors who had nothing but my back, who had nothing but my best interest. So I agree with you. DEI is about the collective we. It's not just about women, it's about all of us. And we all have a role to play. And you talked about championship, advocacy, and all of those things. Yes, we need more of that because it's still hard, it's still difficult, and the air is still thin at the top of these organizations, including government. So I think there is an intentional, deliberate role that our men have to play in order for there to be equity, parity, and fairness, and fair outcomes for women in these organizations.
No, I love how, I've had fantastic mentors and champions as well throughout my career. And it's like, it's not only about like you pushing up, it's really important for the men who do like this and pull you up as well. And a lot of that has to do with cultivating the networks, cultivating the relationships, the mentorship. And it's a two-way street. It's not only about them just miraculously, coming in and pulling you up. You've got to push up too, and, put on your backpack and go up the stairs.
So my experience is exactly the same. Like I said earlier, growing up as a young lawyer, I really didn't have any women that were there to do that for me. And some people say you've been kind of very lucky that I ended up working with a fantastic group of men who have supported me. I just don't want to say that it's pure luck. I think I've also worked quite hard in building those relationships with the men who have supported me. And I like what you just said, it's very much a two-way street, right? I have their back as someone who is younger than them, and they have equally demonstrated that they have my back with that very active sponsorship, giving me opportunities to kind of be present in front of clients and take on leading roles so that even my visibility is enhanced. I really have to give a lot of credit to the men who have supported my career.
One of the things that I've also found really interesting in my conversations with the men is, and we were talking about it earlier, is, asking for what you want or asking for what you need. So when you see something happen as a woman and you say, feeling comfortable enough to say, this is not okay, this is not okay with me, to have the conversation with your male colleagues or your mentor and say, I really need your support when things like this happen with a client or a counterparty or a colleague. I also need you to have my back. I need you to say, this is not okay. Sometimes when a comment is made, you're like discombobulated. You can't believe you just heard that. And you have to ask them to have your back, to step in and say, hey, this is not okay. Or did I hear you correctly? Did you actually say that? And usually they'll say, yeah. And you're like, that's not fine. That's not okay. And the men need to feel comfortable stepping in, but also you as a woman need to ask for that or empower them to do that. And it just makes the experience better for everybody. There's a great saying in Spanish that says, "El que calla otorga." So, like, if you become an accomplice when you see something happen and you don't say anything, and there's ways and ways of saying things.
To that point, going back to the issue of women representation, one of the things that happened once I was promoted is that I was actually given a microphone. So when I see things like that, and in building the relationship with the wonderful men I work with, I actually am typically the one who say that's not okay. This needs to change because mistakes were made in my career in the past, and we're going to do things differently. And I'm there. I'm there to actually say those things, and they're there to actually hear me, which is just incredibly important. It's kind of the two-way street, right?
Absolutely.
So
Go
this
ahead,
notion
Michelle.
of being covered and having male allyship, and I just want to share a brief story, if I
Please.
may. Years ago, when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, I worked for a company leading diversity in practice, and I received a death threat from an employee. I went home on a Friday evening, and this individual slipped a note under my door, and it had the N-word, all over the page, thousands of times, with red like fingerprints, almost like blood prints on a page. And of course, as a young executive, I was scared. I was horrified, scared, and all of those things. Had it not been for my male allies, who basically said, I have your back. We will walk you to your car every night. You will be protected. We are here to protect you. And my CEO, who was a male at the time, also said the same thing. I felt covered. I felt protected. And as a matter of fact, I doubled down on my courage to do the work that I was doing, because what I was doing essentially was helping the workplace become better. And someone didn't necessarily like what I was doing, but I felt covered and protected because my male allies stood up for me and said, we've got you. Don't be afraid. We will walk you to your car every night and make sure that you are protected. That's the kind of covering, that's the kind of advocacy and championship that we need, because things happen. So I just share all of that to say, had it not been for male allies, at least in my career, I don't think I would occupy the seat that I currently have.
Well, and your male allies saying you belong here. Your opinion
Absolutely.
matters. The
Yep.
work that you're doing matters. We will protect you.
We see you, we're going to protect you.
Correct.
And that meant the world to me.
That sense of belonging, and you were able to practice at the top of your license to rock it, to, you are where you are today because they had your back. Thank you for sharing that, Michelle. Let's pivot a little bit about to go into sort of impact that greater representation can have on future generations. Let's talk a little bit about barriers to representation and the importance of building a pipeline. I'll start with you, Ambassador. I mean, in the diplomatic world, and I always hear about the Foreign Service exam in the U.S., which is very scary. I'm sure you had to sit through something similar in Brazil. Do you want to share a little bit about what your experience has been like and your thoughts on barriers to representation and the importance of having greater gender representation as an example and for future generations?
I think example is everything in any area that you work. You mentioned the exam. Yes, the exam to enter the career is very selective. Out of 1,000, few will make it. But I believe that in our case, in the case of the diplomatic career, we look at each other. We look at other women. When I said that I worked very hard, that I made it, et cetera, I did not do anything alone. I had my colleagues, I had my network, I had the supporters, and I think this is what matters. You are not in it alone. You have to be together. In Geneva, when I was representing Brazil at the UN in Geneva, we created something that some of you will not understand because the title is very bold. It's the Lipstick Club. We got together the whole of all the women ambassadors. We decided that we should support each other. So we started going to each other's functions to favor each other's initiative, and it worked marvelously. Men, our colleagues, our ambassadors, the men, they were very jealous of us. But that was not our objective. The objective was to support each other, to advance each other's careers, and to give an example to the younger diplomats that were coming to Geneva. And this group still exists. It was founded in 2009. Today it's called a Band of Sisters.
In terms of barriers, I think sometimes we get in our own way. We can be our own worst critics, self-critics. We do this self-talk about what's not possible, I can't do, or that imposter syndrome that we all talk about all the time. Sometimes I think we are our own barriers to success. And I'm here to say I was a young black girl from New Jersey who had big dreams and aspirations. And I was told many times that that's not possible, that you have the audacity to dream big. And I'm here to tell you, anything and everything is possible. And I think to your point, it's the role modeling, it's the representation, it's looking up and seeing someone that reflected me and my community. That meant the world to me. So I think any and everything is possible, but we sometimes have to get out of our own way and negate that that talk, that negative internal talk.
I agree. I think, and maybe this is kind of a more recent phenomenon perhaps, but I think we're kind of resting on our laurels. I think that there is a sense that it's been done. Like D&I, thank you. It's done. Thank you. We did great. This is a sort of a continuing exercise and effort. And I would challenge all of you, in fact, within your organizations to keep at it, right? Because there are changes in the economy. We all sort of answer to what's going on in the markets and clients and, all of these other pressures. We can really lose sight of the importance of these issues. And for leaders who have a bajillion things on their heads, it's quite easy to say, well, in front of the 100 things that I need to do, I'm just going to park this DE&I initiative with some HR person, and that's going to be sufficient, and I can just put it in some, info memo that I send out to the markets. That is simply not enough, and I would invite everyone in this room and everyone who is listening to kind of keep holding leaders' feet to the fire. This is important. The work is not done. The work is shifting. Like the nature of our discussions has evolved, as Michelle explained earlier, but it needs to keep going. There's just a lot more to do.
May I weigh in? No, I liked Michelle's point about, in our head, the barrier that stays here. Am I good enough? Should I raise my hand? Should I say this? And sometimes I feel that in the professionals of very new generations, those young professionals that are coming in the market, they feel very much sometimes entitled. Because, as you said, Janine, D&I is there. It has been solved for all of us. And in my head, I think that some women, when they see the first obstacle, because they come in the market and they think, oh, everything is worked out. I have the rights to be there. And when they stumble in the first obstacle, they shy away, they go back. No, I believe that as you see and observe an obstacle, you should not go back. You should use this obstacle as a platform to go up and not think I'm entitled because DEI has been resolved. So this obstacle has to be removed by someone else. No, it has to be removed by you, by your own competence. So you should know your file, have an opinion, and be ready to be a competition. Because when you are a competition, those things will repeat in your life. So that's how I see these barriers. Use them as a platform to grow in your own career.
No, absolutely. DEI, if it's not tone from the top, front and center in the C-suite's agenda and accountability, feet to the fire, it just gets, put in a drawer and no change comes about. I have a ton of questions to continue to ask, but I need to open it to questions from the audience. Are there any questions?
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. My name is Marina. I work at Santander, and thank you for the panel, all of you. I heard once something that women don't typically have the same opportunities for networking because we don't often have the vertical networking that men often have. So we have peers, as we mentioned, which are great supporters, but maybe some of our peers are not able to provide us those opportunities, those career opportunities. Especially, still in this day and age, I work in finance, men hang out at golf, and they do things, and, good on them. They all love golf. But we don't often share necessarily the same hobbies or the same sort of social opportunities for doing that. So what advice would you have for specifically career networking when you don't necessarily have a lot of women above you who you could do that vertical networking with? How do you build that? So I guess that's my question.
I'll start. I don't play golf at all. My husband does. but I never liked the game, and so I never turned down a lunch invitation, an early dinner invitation. I will network the hell out of a room. So I think you have to use other mechanisms in order to get to and to cultivate and foster those relationships that you want. One of the things that I've done over the years is I enjoy just the art of discussion, and so I would just extend myself, even in a casual way, to a stranger. If there was some leader who had a skill, a capability, some magic that I didn't necessarily see in myself, I would reach out to them, ask them or invite them for, do you have a few minutes for coffee or whatever the case is, and I would utilize that 30 minutes to my advantage. And so I would say use other things, other mechanisms to be able to foster, cultivate, maintain, and sustain those relationships.
I'll add on to that, Michelle. I'm actually an introvert. I don't have your personality to work the hell out of a room. Absolutely not. I think you need to start looking at networking as part of your job description too. I find that women feel guilty about standing up from their desks and going to a luncheon or leaving early to have drinks. So start thinking about it more methodically, more strategically, and as part of one of the things that you have to do. Like, put it on your to-do list. It'll make you get up from your desk and let go of the guilt. Think of it as part of your job description. Also, with what Michelle was saying, is find what works for you. As an introvert, a room full of people is very difficult for me, but those one-on-one conversations, reaching out to people, finding the spaces to create connections, because then people remember not what you said to them, but how you made them feel. So as you create those connections, they'll introduce you to other people, and you will find your own style of networking. And lastly, on the golf specific point, there's really great poker training now. So there's other things that also put you in that sort of more male space. And come, I'll send you the poker information. Come look for me in the end.
So, I completely agree. One way to kickstart. Number one, I will repeat your name because Marina from Santander, I think you all need to go and meet Marina. This room right here is great, right? And you should all kind of take the opportunity to speak to each other. Be the one inviting, right? If you kind of just wait for people to invite you, you won't necessarily get invited, not because they don't want to, but maybe because they forget. So if you're the one who is extending the coffee, let's have a coffee, let's meet, for an early dinner. I'm traveling, and I'm going to be in your city. I would love to catch up and just just that way, you kind of take it into your own hands. You're not waiting for other people to do anything for you.
I think you're working the room very nicely, Julianne. So empower yourself. I think Mariana mentioned golf. If you like golf, Mariana, create your own golf team with women, other women. But you don't need to emulate, men's ways of networking. I agree with everything that was said here. I think each one of us has to find her comfort zone and what works for her and do the best that she can. But I believe that we women sometimes are very rigorous with ourselves. Men, they talk about anything. They love talking about, things that has nothing to do with work and laugh a lot. But we women, we are afraid of going out and talking about, the new products, new perfumes, our last shopping spree, or things like that. There's nothing wrong with that. This is our way, exchanging recipes. We are women. We have to continue being women. But we can be professionals too. So we have to come out of this disguise of ambassador, CEO, lawyer, and just be yourself. And that helps a lot.
Thank you, Ambassador. There was a question up here.
Yes, and we're going to combine the next two questions.
Okay.
I think I'll go quick. Michelle, you mentioned imposter syndrome. A lot of us deal with that. what was the experiences in your life, as well as how did you overcome them?
You know, it's interesting. I'm going to take a page out of Melody Hobson's book. Melody's the CEO, co-CEO of Ariel Investments. I don't suffer from imposter syndrome. I never have. And that's not to say that I know everything that it took for me to get here. I know every painstaking situation. I know of the death threat. I know all of those things, and I'm very much aware of them. But I also know that I've worked pretty darn hard to get here. I know I've done all the extras. I know I've raised my hand for the tough assignments, that I've sat in rooms where I was the only or the other and was okay with how I showed up in those rooms. So there's no imposter syndrome here. There really isn't. And that's not arrogance at all. That's just confidence. And I've learned that from my mentors and sponsors that I've had over the years. So I really can't even answer the question, because that's just something that I will not own at all. And I know Melody Hobson, she and I talk frequently. She's of the same perspective, doesn't live here. I don't own that. I don't want any part of it. So I would say for those who do, think about how you got here. Right? What are some of the kinds of experiences that you've had to get you to where you are? You're occupying a seat because you deserve to have that seat. Intellectual horsepower is table stakes. You've done the extras. You have grit, you have smarts, you're talented. Own all of that. And just, leverage your power, lean into your power. That's the best that I can say about it.
There was another question?
Yes. This is on. So I have a bit of a different question, swaying from D&I more towards leadership. And thanks to the four of you and to Sarah for sharing your stories, which are very inspiring. I think some of the themes that we've heard from a leadership standpoint are around confidence and drive and standing up and saying, this is what I want, and going for it. And so the flip side of that is vulnerability, right? And I think we all know that great leaders are able to show their vulnerability and build trust with their teams. And so I'm curious to hear your perspectives on, especially as female leaders, how you think about vulnerability and how you think about showing that side of you that isn't always confident and driven, or sorry, maybe not driven, but doesn't always show up knowing exactly what to say and very confident.
They say he who dares greatly. And I've learned over the years to share my story. That's how we stretch, grow, and learn. And I will use myself as the protagonist to make a point, and I will become vulnerable. I'm sitting in a crowded room telling you about my death threat story. I just believe that that's a muscle that most leaders, at least the ones that I've worked for, that were incredibly successful, that's a muscle that they flexed. And so I will use myself as the protagonist to make a point, because I believe in any situation, if there's a sandstorm, I'm going in, I just need a pair of goggles. So I will protect myself, but I also believe in true vulnerability, because I think that is how we make points, that is how we stretch, grow, and learn, and we share ourselves with others. And quite honestly, that's the human side of what leadership looks and feels like. At least
It
from my
inspires
perspective.
when you see when you're humble, when you recognize that you have a gap, when you talk about the struggles that you're having, and you build a team around that, because it becomes a we, it's not an I. So in my experience, the more that you talk about your challenges, your gaps, you put that front and center in front of your team. You also need to give people an instruction manual as to how to interact with you and how to best do that. And I just find that it makes you a much more credible and inspiring leader when you put your vulnerabilities in front of the group. Yes, it does feel vulnerable and uncomfortable, but it makes you that much more effective as a leader. Going back to your imposter syndrome, and it's kind of related, there is Bozoma St. John, there's a case study, and she's done a lot of speaking around this topic, and I'd highly suggest, if you look her up, that she's inspiring. She's done a great job.
So on the two things, I received an accolade a couple of years ago from my law school. I went to Columbia Law School, so for me it was like the pinnacle of my career full circle. It was wonderful. I had a speech prepared. I was just enjoying the moment. I got up to accept the award, and the first thing that came out of my mouth was like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing here. And those were the first words. I think I have imposter syndrome. Those were the first words that came out of my mouth. I think to a certain extent, as Michelle said, you're smart. You have achieved what you have achieved in life. You get to know yourself. To a certain extent, you need to trust that when you're kind of going into a room, into a negotiation, a presentation, you've done your homework. You're the most prepared in the entire room. And you know what? Someone gave you a microphone for a reason. Someone must believe in you because you're here. And that person who believes in you has to be you as well. So that chatter that is kind of in the back of your head needs to come down. It's very difficult for a young person. And it's very easy for me to say these things to you at my age because I know who I am at this point. You just need to keep at it, keep trusting that your hard work and you doing all of these other things and the networking is going to really pay off. As to vulnerability, I spent probably the first 10 years of my career hiding the fact that I have 3 children and I have all of this hang-ups and stresses in my life, and I worked ridiculous hours, and it's like, oh my God, Janine, she must be insane, and all of the chatter. And you know what? At this point, my superpower is the fact that, yes, I have achieved this. I have a family. I am happily married. And I am still here, right? But I bring those experiences, I would even dare to say the word compassion, to my everyday, because I remember what it's like to be a young person kind of struggling at it and, thinking through what am I doing sitting around this table. And I try to make everyone in my team comfortable. They know me. I've shared some of these experiences with them. I don't necessarily air them out to the entire world. There are people who do not need to know facts about me. But that is an expression of vulnerability that you can really, kind of channel to, good use, if that makes sense.
Okay. Let me address vulnerability first. There are, in my opinion, many levels of vulnerability, and there's nothing wrong in showing vulnerability. If you listen to a dissenting opinion and you agree to that and you change your opinion because you heard something different than that idea that you had proposed, there's nothing wrong. This is not being vulnerable. This is being a good leader. So there are many levels. If you're vulnerable to a point of creating a disturbance, then you need help. But there are many levels of vulnerability. And being yourself, there's nothing wrong. To your question, I am here, sitting here and wondering, why was I invited to what contribution do I have? And this has been my whole life. Every time I've been invited to do something or I have a task, I ask the same question. Am I good enough? It doesn't matter. I go and I do it, and I do my best. If people like it, so good. If I like it, even better. That's it.
I think that with that, thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Janine, for joining me this morning. It's been great. Thank you for listening. And thank you for the Council of the Americas for hosting us.